Hi, I'm Belinda, the Director of the Institute of Personal Care Science, and I often get asked, how do I pick and choose between different preservatives or different emulsifiers? What's your favourites? What should I use in this situation? So I've put together a video because there's not just one answer. And often I get asked, oh, well, what emulsifier should I use in my moisturiser? Well, it depends. What preservative is the best one to use? It depends. It depends on so many factors. One of the first things that it depends upon is philosophy. How natural or not does the product need to be? The next biggest decision maker is usually the price and availability. So even when you're picking materials from a small supplier, what should you be looking for? And what are some of my favorites when it comes to choosing different ingredients? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk you through some of the selection criteria and let you know what some of my favorites are. But just remember, it depends. It depends on everything else you have in that formula. And of course, it depends on your region and your ability to access some of these materials. So now, let's take a look at what it depends on. Start by talking about preservatives, and I often get asked, what's your favorite? What preservative is going to do the job every time? And I've got to say that's the wrong approach. With preservatives, they have a very specific mode of action, and I'm going to tell you now, a lot of consumers have issues with just about every preservative that is out there. So first of all, how natural or not does the product need to be? And what is your particular consumer group going to be most offended by, if you like, with your preservative choice? So when it comes to picking a preservative, some things you need to think about are broad spectrum coverage. You need to make sure that if it's a water-based formula, you're protecting against bacteria, yeast, and mold every single time, anytime that product has a pH between 3 and 10. Don't just pick fungicidal materials if it's a low pH. That's still not broad spectrum enough, and I see beginners make that mistake. So you need broad spectrum preservation. I also briefly mentioned the word cidal. There is a difference. There is a difference between preservatives that are called static agents. They hold the growth steady, and cidal agents which kill off any microorganisms present. The big difference is how much contamination could that product be exposed to over its shelf life. Now, if it's a product that's in a jar that will be dipped into constantly, the lid might be left off for some period of time, you're going to need cidal agents. Static agents are only good where the product is going to be packed such that it's going to have very limited air or consumer exposure, like serum dispensers or sachets or single-use products. So make sure you check out whether it's a static or a cidal agent as well. And then there is the biggest issue, and usually the biggest mistake I see learners make, and that is not picking the preservative to suit the final pH of the product. Now, preservatives have limited activity over certain pH ranges. And a lot of your more natural type preservatives suit acidic pH environments, which means a lot of the preservatives that you might want to use may not be effective when the product has a pH of 6, for example. And just remember that over time, that pH could move slightly up or down. That's a very normal phenomena for a product to do. So you need to make sure that the preservative you select will provide effective coverage for the product at not only its finished product pH on the day it's made, but also where that pH may drift to over the shelf life of the product. So pH is a very big selection criteria when making sure the preservative you select is going to work well in your formula. You also need to make sure you use the right amount. There is a misconception out there amongst a lot of people that we use preservatives at 1%, and that's not correct. That can be far too much of some preservatives and far too little of others. So you need to make sure you're using the right amount of the preservative to be effective and not be a regulatory or safety issue. So what's some of my favourites? Well, if I'm not limited by philosophy, I love Liquid Germal Plus. It's an extremely mild preservative, but it has a couple of inky names that some consumers just don't like. One of my favourite natural preservatives to use is GeoGuard ECT. I find it very effective and very reliable, and it covers products quite well up to a pH of around 7. It's not completely natural, but it's accepted in natural and organic products by Cosmos and your major certifiers. Another favourite I have is Plant Preservative WSR by Campo Research. This material has a really broad pH coverage and works extremely well, but it's not the cheapest. It works great in natural and organic products, and it has a very pleasing inky name. I also really like the reliability of Yuxil PE9010. It's not accepted in natural products. And I also like Naticide for its efficacy, but it has an aroma that doesn't suit a lot of products because it's more of a vanilla rose-like aroma, which only suits certain market segments. So there's some of my favourites just because of their performance, but also some of their shortcomings as far as consumers are concerned. Check out what you're able to use and access. And again, not one material is going to serve every purpose. I pick and choose between these materials in particular because they work so well and are effective over quite a broad pH range, but there's times where some of them might not quite suit the brief that I'm formulating to. Now let's talk about gums and polymer selection. You would have seen from my videos, I'm a big fan of xanthan gum. It's very reliable, it's natural, it thickens well, it helps stabilize particles, but it can leave the product looking a little stringy, looking a little translucent, and can feel a bit tacky in higher proportions. You can get better grades of xanthan gum. You've seen me use materials like Cosmoderm X Soft, where I want a better appearance, less stringiness, and better skin feel. But when it comes to selecting other gums or polymers, it depends. It depends again on philosophy. So I'm a big fan of Sepimax Zen anytime I have a challenging environment. It's a synthetic material, but it never lets me down. This material is so electrolyte resistant, it will thicken salt and perming products. So if I have a challenging system where I can use synthetic materials, Sepimax Zen is going to be my pick every single time. But there's plenty of other natural choices as well. I'm a big fan of Siligel if I'm making a natural product and want a very elegant skin feel and price isn't such an issue. I'm also a fan of Amigel and Sclerotium gum, where leaving the product to hydrate overnight isn't an issue. When you're picking gums and polymers, you need to think about several things. You need to think about the viscosity that it will create. Do you want a big impact on viscosity? Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. Just because they increase viscosity doesn't mean they'll stabilize particles. Is that an important feature? If it is, I'm a big fan of the bentonites, even for natural products. They form a house of cards structure that helps stabilize particles extremely well without having a big impact on the viscosity. One of my favorites for this purpose is Van Natural XGB. It contains a little bit of xanthan gum, so it helps boost the viscosity, but stabilizes particles extremely well, even in organic foundation products. You also need to think about charge compatibility. Some of your gums are negatively charged, some are positively charged, and some carry no charge. Now it depends on what you're creating and what else is in that formula, whether that matters or not. So you need to pick your gum or polymer depending on the charge in the formula. Now if you want nice clear gels, your Carbopol materials are fantastic, and there's different grades for different sensory feeling, but they're not at all electrolyte tolerant. So if you're going to be introducing a lot of electrolytes to the formula, you'll need to pick something else. And of course, there's modified celluloses and modified guars, which can also give you nice transparent gels with different sensory aspects. So there's a lot of choice when it comes to gums and polymers. You just need to think about the compatibility of the environment they're going to be introduced into. Now with gums and polymers, there's another thing that's really important, and that is the method. Method is crucial. Method is crucial with all sorts of ingredients, but especially for your gum or polymer that you use. You could make the perfect gum or polymer selection, but if you process it in the wrong way, it might as well not be present. So make sure whatever you pick and choose suits your final method to get the best performance out of that gum or polymer selection. Next, let's talk about lipids. Oh my goodness, how do we choose from the library of available lipids? This is the fun part, you get to play. So with lipids, it's such a broad classification of materials. It's all of your oily substances. It's oils, esters, mineral oils, silicons, butters. It even includes some waxes. So the biggest selection criteria when you're choosing your lipid is the way it feels. Not just the way it feels, but also the way it spreads. So if I'm making a body product, I want a long spreading lipid, a product that will spread a long way and have a good playtime while I massage it into my skin. If I'm making a product for the face, I want a shorter playtime. I don't want it to spread very far, and I don't want it to feel too greasy after application. Now, if I'm picking plant oils, they do have a heavier residual feeling, but they're great for really dry skin where extra emolliency is required. One of my favorite classes of materials is esters. There's so many different esters out there. They can go from very light skin feel, long spreading, to very viscous, rich, cushiony feeling, and even some really tacky esters that are fantastic in lip glosses. So, what does the product need to feel like? That is going to drive your lipid selection. If I was trying to pick some of my favorites in this category, it's such a huge category for me to pick from. I'm also going to look for lipids that have a good product story to tell. One of my absolute favorites to include in a product where I also want to build a good product story is L22 by Floratec. This material feels incredible, and it also has some fantastic efficacy data. So I'm going to get performance from a functional material. I'm also a big fan of esters that mimic silicone-like feel in a formula. The Lexfeel Natural series does this extremely well, and the way they've actually called their materials matches up with the molecular weight of the corresponding dimethicone. So if you're looking for a drop-in dimethicone replacement, you can use the Lexfeel N series very reliably to do exactly that. I'm still a big fan of silicons and the diversity that the entire silicon family brings to cosmetic formulations. As a class of materials, silicons provide a beautiful, cushiony, velvety feel with no greasy residue. So if that's important to your product, silicons are a material you should investigate. And of course, there's so many silicon derivatives that make formulating with silicons an absolute joy, and you can create some amazing and innovative materials from the derivatives that are in this class of chemicals. So speak with your silicon supplier and they would have some amazing solutions to create products you may never have thought possible, with an incredible velvety, silky afterfeel that simply can't quite be achieved from any other type of lipid family. So then it's probably time to talk about emulsifiers, and this is another class of materials where I get asked, what emulsifier could I use for this cream? Well, it depends. It depends on everything else that you need in that cream product. There's a couple of things that can help drive your selection when picking and choosing between the hundreds of emulsifiers out there. Number one, if it's a leave-on product, then you really want to be using a non-ionic blended material. a material that has two inky names, two different materials already blended into its waxy form. If you want to make a cream, you need waxy emulsifiers, because if you use liquid emulsifiers, the best you'll get is milk. So if you want a cream, you need waxy materials. The other thing you need to look at from the early stages of your selection is, do you want to create a water and oil emulsion or an oil and water emulsion? Now, building viscosity into an oil and water emulsion is the hard part. And of course, you don't want to overuse your emulsifiers to build that creamy viscosity, otherwise you'll get excess white rub-in time. And the hard part when creating a water and oil emulsion is to keep the viscosity down. So you need to pick and choose your materials to help with that final viscosity of the product. You also need to pick your emulsifiers to help stabilize the product. In fact, that's the number one reason for using them. Water and oil simply won't come together without an emulsifier to hold them that way. Now, we use anionic materials predominantly in oil and water emulsions to build viscosity and stability, but they're not the mildest on the skin. So we should always companion an anionic emulsifier selection with a non-ionic blend for stability and mildness. When we're making a conditioner, we actually want a cationic charge. So we want to pick a cationic surfactant or cationic emulsifier to give us a strong positive charge, and that helps the hair feel really slippery and silky after application. But again, they're not usually that mild. So we need to include some non-ionic waxy emulsifiers to build body and viscosity to that conditioning product so it looks creamy and rich, and consumers look for that creamy richness in their product as a mark of how conditioning the end product will be. But we also use non-ionic materials in these formulas to boost the mildness. There's other considerations like HLB values, which help us pick and choose between emulsifiers depending on how water-loving or how oil-loving they need to be. So now you're going to say, Belinda, what's some of your favourites? Well, for an anionic emulsifier, I am a big fan of glyceryl stearate citrate. It has a really nice feel in the finished product. I'm also a big fan of Montanov 68, where I need to formulate a green product because it's a very reliable waxy emulsifier to build good stability and viscosity into my lotion or cream formula, and it builds a lot of stability in there as well. So I know I'm going to get a good shelf life out of the product. I have other materials I really like the feel of as well, and that includes some of the Emulsifiers range by Gata-Fossé and Olive M1000 by Holstar. When it comes to creating water and oil emulsions, one of my absolute favourites is Arlacell 1689, and they have another material, Arlacell 1690, that also performs really well. Now, these are liquid blends, so they help stabilise your water and oil emulsion really well without increasing too much viscosity. And remember, keeping that viscosity down is one of our problems in a water and oil emulsion. I'm also a big fan of glyceryl stearate in water and oil emulsions because it simply works. But when it comes down to it, there are hundreds of different emulsifiers. So again, selection is driven by philosophy. How natural or not does it need to be? How much stabilizing power do you need from your emulsifier? How much viscosity do you need in that finished product? And a lot of them vary significantly on price and minimum order quantities. So you'll need to check that out as well to find the emulsifier that's going to fit your needs the best. Emulsifiers can also impact the finished product skin feel. So you might need to play around a little with the input and the lipids you're using to get that skin feel just right, because consumers now more than ever are really attuned to the sensory of a finished product. Now let's talk about surfactants, the foaming, bubbling materials that help give us a great clean. I often get asked, Belinda, why do so many different surfactants get used, or how do I pick the right surfactant for my formula? Again, one of the first things I'm going to say is philosophy. How natural or not does the material need to be? Once you get past that obstacle, you need to make sure you're getting a good clean, and you're going to get the best clean from your anionic materials. You need to companion those with non-ionic materials to boost mildness, and if it doesn't have to be completely natural, put an amphoteric material in there because they boost mildness and they boost foam dramatically. Now, while we're talking about foam, just so you're aware, you don't need a lot of bubbles for an effective clean, but your consumer will never believe that. So make sure you give them plenty of bubbles. Make sure you're using materials that foam well, because their perception of how good that foaming product works is how much foam it actually makes. You don't need excess foam to clean, but your consumer thinks you do. So make sure you give them what they're looking for, tick that box, and make sure it's got plenty of foam. It is a misconception that oils will add softness to your finished product. They don't. Oils are simply another thing for the formula to have to stabilize. So limit the oils you put into your foaming products, if at all, and use superfatting materials instead. A true superfatting material that helps boost the functionality of your surfactant formula is one that has a water-loving and an oil-loving portion, a HLB of around 11 to 15. So yes, they can be like solubilizers as well. They should be in a liquid or a paste form so that you can mix them into your formula easily. And what these materials do is impart a lot of mildness. You can also pick your superfatting material to boost your product story. You can get a lot of ethoxylated lipids, and of course then you can boost that marketing story by talking about the lipid portion of the ethoxylated material as being present in that formula. They add a lot of mildness and a lot of softness to the after wash off skin feel of your finished surfactant formula. This is why you need to use a few different types of surfactants in your foaming formulas. Using just one material on its own might give you good foam, but maybe not the mildness. Using one material on its own might give you the foam and performance, but maybe not a good product story. And one material on its own certainly won't give you foam, performance, marketing story, and a good after wash off skin feel. You really need to tick all of these boxes to give your consumer a product that they're really happy with. So what's some of my favorites? I do like glutamate materials. They are very mild, but they don't foam the best. They don't thicken very well at all, but they do provide a nice mild clean. If you can companion them with a hydroxysultane, you'll have an extremely mild product. But of course, cocamidopropyl betaine is a very commonly used amphoteric material that's also very well priced and readily available if you can't get the hydroxysultane amphoteric materials. When it comes to superfatting materials, I do like ethoxylated lipids because of the marketing story and softness that they impart. If you can't use PEGs or ethoxylated materials in your formula, or you're looking for some more green alternatives, Lamasoft PO65 is a good superfatting material, and I really like the Avonic Tegosoft and Tegosolve range to impart extra performance, foam or mildness into a finished product. There are literally thousands of materials that a chemist can choose from, and even if you're sourcing from a small supplier, there's still hundreds of materials that you can choose from out there. So how do you pick and choose? Remember, it depends. It depends on the philosophy of the formula, the cost and availability, and also all those other aspects I've just spoken about for different formulation types. It's no good just asking me, will this material work in my formula? Because it could. And let's face it, cosmetic formulas contain multiple ingredients, and it totally depends on everything else you've used in that formula as to whether one change or multiple changes might be required. If you do want a product review, we can offer that service, but I simply can't give you a simple yes or no answer on one material, or review your formula in 30 seconds and tell you what the best material might be to add. It takes proper consideration to formulate safe, effective, stable products that meet the required budget and perform the way you need them to please your target audience. I hope you've found this information useful and try out some of my favourites. They're my favourites for a reason, and there's nothing wrong with you getting some of your favourites too. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've created this video because I get asked those questions a lot, and remember, it totally depends and it needs a proper formulation review before I could give any sort of individual advice. But hopefully you've got some tips and tricks and favourites of mine that you can go out and try for yourself. Please give it a thumbs up, leave any questions or comments below, and remember to subscribe to receive notifications about all our videos. Happy formulating!